This is the moment that a P&O Ferries boss sacked 800 workers on a video call.
The company has made the decision that its vessels, going forward, will be primarily crewed by a third-party crew provider. Therefore, I am sorry to inform you that this means your employment is terminated with immediate effect on the grounds of redundancy. Your final day of employment is today.
Workers were then immediately asked to disembark the ships they were working on, and in some cases, contracted security officers with handcuffs were sent on board to intimidate them. At least one captain refused. Eugene Favier of the Pride of Hull instructed his staff to draw up the gangway. This prevented hired security from entering the ship and triggered an occupation that lasted more than 5 hours. P&O justified the brutal move by suggesting the restructuring and redundancies were necessary due to its operating at a $100 million annual loss. But the company that owns P&O, that's Dubai-based DP World, increased their profits in the first half of last year by 52%, jumping from $313 million to $475 million. Its turnover increased from $4 billion to nearly $5 billion. The brutal manner of the sacking, for a while at least, appeared to unite politicians against P&O bosses. That included Minister for Maritime Robert Courts. He made this statement in Parliament.
Let me now turn to the issue of the seafarers, Mr. Deputy Speaker. These are hard-working, dedicated staff who have given years in service to P&O. The way they have been treated today is wholly unacceptable, and my thoughts are first and foremost with them. Reports of workers being given zero notice and escorted off their ships with immediate effect, while being told cheaper alternatives would take up their roles, shows the insensitive way in which P&O have approached this issue, a point I have made crystal clear to P&O's management when I spoke to them earlier this afternoon. Good. As I told Peter Hebblethwaite, I am extremely concerned and frankly angry at the way workers have been treated today by P&O.
I'm frankly angry. If you have to explicitly say you're angry, it makes it seem a little bit less sincere than it otherwise would. And I mean, it wasn't sincere, was it? Because it turns out the Maritime Minister, in fact, had prior notice that P&O were going to let go of their workers, and he didn't tell anyone, or at least his boss didn't tell anyone. On Thursday, RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch made that point on LBC.
Well, our members have been sacked brutally by a paramilitary security force coming onto their vessels, their place of work, and turfing them out. The company has acted illegally, directly. I've just been on a call with the shipping minister, Robert Courts, and told him that. He knew this last night, by the way, and didn't tell anyone. The Department for Transport knew this was happening, and they knew they were going to break the law. The way that you break the law is by not informing the Department of Business, Industry and Science these days, or the Transport Minister. They have to fill out what's called a HR1 form to make redundancies. They have to give 45 or 90 days notice of that consultation, and you work through with the trade unions and the reps what you're going to do about this situation. They have flagrantly broken the law deliberately. The government knew they were going to do it last night. He said that in Parliament. He just said that to me on a Zoom call.
On Thursday, The Guardian reported that Boris Johnson's official spokesperson said, "We weren't given any notice to this." But today, the story has changed. According to The Guardian again, Johnson's spokesperson confirmed on Friday that senior officials at the Department for Transport had first been informed about the firm's plan on Wednesday evening, but had kept the information within a small group because of concerns about commercial sensitivity. So, due to concerns about commercial sensitivity, the Transport Secretary didn't tell the Prime Minister that 800 people were about to be sacked. I don't think that adds up whatsoever. And if he didn't tell you, that's a problem with your government. We should go into some detail. In that LBC clip we showed you, the RMT boss suggested the redundancies are illegal. And there has been a fair amount of confusion surrounding this point, and especially what the consequences of that would imply. This was employment barrister Daniel Barnett on LBC.
It is illegal, of course it is. It may be effective in that the dismissals are effective, they've taken effect, but it is unlawful in the sense that the employees will be entitled to certain amounts of compensation. And there's 3 sets of compensation they'll be entitled to get. It doesn't come to a huge amount, I'll tell you that much. First of all, notice pay. That might be a little bit for new employees, much more for long-serving employees. Second of all, a statutory redundancy payment. Again, less for new employees, generally a cap of about £10,000 on that for very long-serving employees. And also something called a protective award, which is an award that tribunals give if there hasn't been proper consultation before a dismissal. And that's up to 90 days pay, so effectively another 3 months pay for everybody. But what I imagine P&O have done here is they've taken a calculated, cynical view that it's cheaper to get the new agency labour in today and pay this compensation a year down the line, because that's how long it takes for a case to get to court, than it would be to do it all properly and have full consultation with the union.
So the suggestion there is that because the law wasn't followed properly, workers can claim compensation, but beyond that, P&O would be off the hook. Speaking on Radio 4's Today programme, though, Beth Hale, an employment lawyer at CM Murray, had a stronger view.
Is it within the rules? Probably not. Almost certainly not. What P&O seem to have done is offered compensation packages which purport to pay their way out of their legal obligations, and in doing so, they have tried in an attempt to bypass their legal obligations. What they ought to have been doing is consulting with staff, consulting with the unions about potential dismissals, considering whether there are any suitable alternative roles, going through the processes. They also ought to have made a formal notification to the government, to the Secretary of State, about the proposed dismissals. When there were dismissals in this kind of number, that's a legal obligation. And so there's potential criminal liability for directors as well. So it's a big, it's potentially an enormous breach. But what they purport to be doing, as I say, is paying their way out of it.
So there does seem to be some legal ambiguity, at least in terms of the consequences for P&O. What does seem clear, though, is that P&O ferries were able to fire British workers when their French, Spanish and Irish counterparts kept their jobs. And there's been some suggestion this could be down to Brexit. The RMT General Secretary, in fact, mentioned that when speaking to LBC. But another possibility is that this is down to Britain's uniquely weak labour laws. It looks like P&O have been encouraging fired workers to reapply for their jobs through the agency it's using to replace them for less money and less security, of course. This fire and rehire tactic is perfectly legal in the UK. It was legal before Brexit. It's still legal now. In contrast, in France, workers have much stronger protections against fire and rehire. And in Spain and Ireland, it's downright illegal. Aaron, what's your take on these sackings? And I suppose, your favoured explanation for why this was possible?
Yeah, the Tory outrage is quite instructive, actually. You also had it with Natalie Elphicke. She's the local MP. She was at the demonstration, I think, earlier today. She was jeered. And the Tories are kind of in a strange... It's a bit like inflation. They're not meant to care about this stuff. Their entire thing is leave it to the market. The state's not meant to get involved. Like with inflation, just get it down. The state shouldn't be too active. For instance, if we're worried about energy prices, no, we can't bring the energy companies into public ownership to ensure you get relatively stable prices for the consumer. That can only ever fail. We can never actually have an interventionist state to deal with problems. I think with this kind of stuff and with inflation, so with layoffs, in quite strategic industries, you see it frequently. It's like steel or with P&O. The Tories know they're on incredibly weak ground. And actually, even yesterday, had even Ian Dale, a failed Tory parliamentary candidate and a pundit with an LBC show, saying that the government should be considering nationalisation of P&O. And I do agree with that. And I think for the Conservatives, they know they're on very weak ground here. They know there's a cost of living crisis. And as much as the pundits love to talk about Jeremy Corbyn, the two big reasons the Tories have their majority today, one is they were going to deliver on Brexit. The second is levelling up. They did capture a significant part of that zeitgeist, some of which also went to Jeremy Corbyn, which is about the economic status quo isn't working. It's time that the forgotten people, the left behind, those without a voice in politics, were finally listened to. And so on stuff like this, they can't go missing in action, which explains this bizarre spectre of free market fundamentalists in the House of Commons pretending they give a damn about working people being replaced by agency staff, because believe me, they don't. That's the essence of Thatcherism. That's the essence of their political project. Of course they don't care. They have to pretend they care because now it's going to become an incredibly salient issue. I think Labour actually have been really good on this. You've seen, and I don't like to talk about this through the prism of Westminster politics, but it's been interesting to see Ed Miliband at demonstrations saying that, government should intervene, or Carl Turner say things which are actually politically not nonsensical madness, which is what you normally get from his Twitter feed, or even Keir Starmer making some positive noises. It's the kind of issue. I saw some people comparing it to the Gromwick strike, where it can actually polarize society in a really positive way. And we say, look, this isn't how we want to treat workers. We don't believe in fire and rehire. We want people to be in stable contracts where they're paid well, but also have security about what the future holds for them. So I think obviously it's not good news for these workers, because 800 of them could. I mean, we don't know how this ends, but it looks very bad for them right now. But I think more broadly, the politics of it are so unpopular, and that's why the Conservative Party are having to immediately present themselves as somehow not part of the problem, which they are.
One thing that I found particularly shocking about this story is that what they were hoping to do was sack all of these people on the spot, and then within a few hours, replace them all. So these ships were supposed to, continue running that day, but with a completely different set of staff. And that requires a lot of planning. So they had to put together this new set of staff to replace the old set of staff. And there was a interview on a BBC radio station of one of these people, and they had to keep it secret from them as well. So here is Mark Kenney-Baldwin, that's an agency worker hired by P&O, speaking to BBC Radio Humberside.
This all started for me Friday a week ago. I got onto one of the agency company websites, or on Facebook actually, and saw there were some jobs going. I just finished doing some work for them on another ship, and got in touch with them because it sounded very exciting what they were saying, the agency, and they were saying that there was a new ship coming to British waters and it needed a full new crew. And they said, could I be in Glasgow for last Monday? I said, that's fine. I said, what's the name of the ship and where is it sailing to and from? And they said, I'm sorry, we can't give you that information.
So this guy got a job last week and then spent most of this week in Glasgow waiting. Then it gets even weirder. On Thursday morning, the agency workers were loaded onto a bus at 5:30 a.m.
Even when we got on the bus, they wouldn't tell us where we were going, and we asked. So we're on our way there in this bus, and we stopped in a Morrison's, and we thought, oh, good, a rest break, we'll get some breakfast because we're hungry. We, haven't slept well in my case, and we've been up since 5:30 or catching a bus at 5:30. So we go into Morrison's, and then there's 10 guys and 2 young ladies in there, all dressed in black and looking very menacing and intimidating with handcuffs and whatever, and having breakfast with us.
That would be security guards hired to hassle the sacked workers. Eventually, the bus gets to the dock at Cairn Ryan, where they wait for hours.
But then the funny thing about it, one of the guys that was with us, the agency guys, as we all were, as I said, he'd actually just come off that particular ship 3 weeks ago. And so he had phone numbers of, people still on that ship. So we contacted them. We had to sort of do it on the quiet because the companyman was still in the ship with us, in the bus with us. And so we started getting reports that, that people are losing their jobs. And we said, are you still on? Is this the ship? And they're saying, yeah, we've been called into their mess room or whatever on their ship, and they were waiting for an announcement. So anyway, they moved us in through security into the dock area. So we're parked, I'm going to say, 100 yards at the most from the ship, the back of the ship, the stern of the ship. So we're in contact with these people on the ship, and then we hear we've all been fired. And it was horrible. The feeling amongst the guys on. We weren't bought on that bus to replace British people in their jobs. You know what I mean? That's us. That's us. We're British seafarers, and that wasn't what we were told was going to happen.
It's just so unbelievably evil, isn't it? Not only are you telling the existing workforce that, they've lost their job on that day with immediate effect via a Zoom call, but you've created this whole, parallel workforce who don't even know what they're doing. You heard at the end of that interview, that guy didn't want to be, what you'd often call scab labor. So someone who has been brought in to replace people who are on decent working conditions to allow them to be fired without it causing any problem to the bosses. Now, the bosses hoped that would happen by these people not realizing the ship that they were getting on had previously been occupied, previously been manned by people who'd just been fired. They just said, "Oh, this is a new ship for you to sail on." They only found out because they knew someone who was already on that ship. So you could have had all of these workers get on that ship, sort of sail it away. They don't know that they're part of this incredibly cynical, brutal ploy by the bosses to sack people on decent pay and decent conditions and replace them with people on lower conditions with no respect whatsoever for people who have potentially worked on that ship for decades. Aaron, what did you make of that? I just thought that, that retelling of that story was just remarkable.
Yeah, and I think what this all crystallizes to me, Michael, is on the left we talk about a lack of public service ethos. There is not a sufficient public service ethos. You get outsourcing, you get privatization, and what really is very dangerous for the body politic is that we don't take public service seriously. We don't reward it, right? You get nurses that are paid a pittance when they're doing some of the most important work out there, or care workers. And at the other end of the scale, you look at politicians, and the minute they can, they go running to work for lobbyists at 3-4 times more than they earned as MPs. But alongside public service, we've also lost something in the private sector, which might sound strange for a socialist to say. But these businesses, and look, there's always been scumbags trying to exploit workers, laying people off. But what's accelerated and intensified in recent decades is you have a new class of corporate wanker, there's no other word for it, who go into workplaces, change agents, human resource innovators, and they are the ones tasked with doing this kind of thing, right? We're going to move to a more flexible, labor force within the organization. I'd love to see the person who's responsible for this in their LinkedIn page. And that's a big thing now about sort of corporate governance. And of course, that's an outgrowth of shareholder capitalism. People aren't saying what's best for this business in 5, 10, 15, 20-year timeframes. They're saying what's best for this business this quarter, the next quarter. So incredibly short term. The people responsible for this have probably a real Johnny-come-latelys. I don't know for sure, but that's the general pattern. And they'll move on. And you see this in the corporate governance of universities. Somebody comes in, they're on a huge wage, they fuck up loads of people's lives, they actually undermine the business's brand, they don't make long-term smart decisions, then they piss off with loads of cash in their pockets. And this is not a smart way to run society. So I'm not defending business, I'm not defending the private sector. That would be a very strange thing for me to be doing. But I think this kind of decision-making, it is so utterly short-sighted and shambolic. I think it speaks to a genre, a variant of capitalism, which has only really been around for the last 20, 25 years, which just sees people as utterly, not this or that person, everyone as utterly expendable. Utterly expendable. You want weekends and you want holiday pay and pensions and sick pay. Too much, sorry. Yes, I know I'm on £200,000 a year and I spend holidays in the Maldives and God knows where 4 times a year, but that's not for the likes of you. That's just for people like me, because I know best and I'm smart and I'm one of the good people. As a class of people sort of running the private sector in this country with outsourcing, with privatization, who are leeches fundamentally on working people up and down this country, channeling money to shareholders and the FTSE 100 and the big companies listed on this country's stock exchange, or their overseas owners in the case of P&O Ferries. Christ, Michael, the parent company of P&O paid out, I think you said this earlier, a dividend of more than £200 million in 2020. Okay, they said, well, we're in the red this year, sorry, £100 million. But again, it goes back to that short-term shareholder value thing. Well, okay, you were making loads of money one year. How about you don't create astronomical dividends and hold some of it back, because bad things happen, like pandemics, which obviously are a major problem for your business model, which is cross-border transactions and movement of people and goods. So this is a really bad way to run business. To go back to my previous point about the lack of public sector ethos, the lack of long-term planning within the private sector and the Tory party and what Thatcherism is this. It is this. It's about not looking at somebody as a human being or a loyal employee for 20 years or 10 years who does their job really well and is really conscientious. It's about looking at them as an abstract unit of labor who can be removed for another unit which is slightly more efficient. Forget retirement. Forget whether or not they can look after their kids. Forget the fact this is another human being. And that is the root of the economic model we presently have. So yes, the people running this operation in P&O are scumbags, but they are an avatar for a much bigger problem. Carillion, the various private rail operators in this country, people like Richard Branson, they are the face of modern capitalism. The second there's a problem, we're in the red this year, we've got to lay people off. Well, you have good years, you have bad years. You can't operate like that. And I think you're right. We need to bring about laws in relation to fire and rehire. By the way, this could have happened when we're in the European Union. Anybody who's talking about Brexit as a result of this, rather than focusing on the evil misdeeds of P&O, needs to give their head a shake. This could have been done before we left, and it can be done if we rejoin, for all the EU rejoiners out there. This is about labour standards, and it's about legislating to ensure, inside or outside the EU, this can't happen again.
We should also just add, I think, there is one sliver of hope in this story. Obviously, 800 people have lost their jobs. This is the big headline figure. But that account we showed you, that was a worker who was told what his pay and conditions would be. He accepted that job. He was going to do that job until he discovered he would be replacing people who'd been brutally fired, right? So that is solidarity in action, isn't it? His conditions hadn't been changed by what he discovered. All he discovered was that him going and working on that ship would demonstrate a lack of solidarity with people who'd just been fired, and so he didn't take that job. So the sliver of hope to take from what is a really awful and infuriating story.